welcome to the Resilient Mental State Podcast. I'm Kyle Shepard, husband, father, and resilience instructor of over 10 years. Join me as I sit down with writers, independent thinkers, and extraordinary individuals to discuss their unique wisdom through the lens of resilience. Resilience is the ability to effectively manage and recover from stress. It is essential to endure and grow from life's inevitable adversities. Resilience is a skill that can be trained.
Patrick Van Horne. About 10 years ago, I first read the book that you co-authored that's sitting behind me, Left of Bang. And that was when I was stationed at Camp Lejeune, a Marine Corps duty station, so we have some overlap there. Of course, I'm in the Navy, but I was stationed there as an audiologist, and that book was recommended to me, and at that time, it was one of my favorite books that I ever read. And it resonated with me because as an audiologist who specializes in auditory performance, I started thinking about how hearing relates to situation awareness, and it very much influenced how I discuss my profession to help warfighters maintain communication capability, situation awareness, and stay left of bang. It's become one of my favorite terms. And then it was about 6-7 years later, I read that book again when I was at Naval Hospital Guam, and I was teaching stress management and resilience. And I didn't read it thinking that it would resonate for me at a personal level. I just reread it because I was like, hey, it was an audiology related reason. I love this book. Let's open it back up. And then I read it that second time and it just hit me a different way. So I started thinking about how this concept can apply to other areas of life. And then amazingly enough, a few years later, I start writing on Substack, and then things grow and I get the chance to meet you. And I've gotten to meet a lot of amazing people on this platform, but I've told you a few times when I get weird when we're texting, like it's surreal to me to talk to one of my favorite authors of one of my favorite books and now call you a friend when it was 10 years prior I was reading this book. But in that time, since we've met on Substack, not only have I evolved how it applies to my life in real time, and even in the past few weeks, we've seen how you continue to evolve what has come from this book as you apply it through CP Journal on Substack and, of course, your organization. And I'm stoked to talk to you about that tonight, brother. How have you been?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me back on your show.
Absolutely. Like you said, we did this about 7 or so months ago the first time. And at that time, it was talking about the book, the concept Left of Bang. And you've been on so many podcasts talking about that. We're not going to do much of that tonight, but just in case people didn't hear that previous episode or haven't read your book or all the other podcasts that you've been on, how do you describe Left of Bang, generally speaking, where the book came from?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And so usually when I'm talking to people, I recommend they start by taking something they care about. It could be something bad, like an attack or severe weather, or it could be something good, like a promotion at work or a new business opportunity. That event, whether it's good or bad, is bang. And when you take bang and you put it onto a timeline, it is time zero. It is directly in the middle of that line. When you are left of bang, it means you are operating earlier on the timeline. Specifically, it means that you have the ability to recognize and identify that bang is coming. You can identify those pre-event indicators that exist that alert you and provide that warning that, hey, bang is, we are approaching bang. When you are right of bang, it means that you're on the opposite side of the timeline. It means that the first time you recognize that or you start taking action because of something, the event has already started. And whether it's because you couldn't identify the warning signs or you chose not to act on them, whenever you are right of bang, you are reacting to whatever event just happened. And once you get that concept that we are trying to move left, we are trying to become more proactive, you find that there's really kind of 3 different ways in your life or in your organization that you can identify and start to be recognize these pre-event indicators and start to get ahead of either those good or bad events that could affect your life or that you care about.
And the way you described it, it's so cool that, yes, it was initially created for the Marine Corps Combat Hunter Program to recognize anomalies in a combat environment, and then to treat situation awareness as a capability and a skill to recognize those anomalies rather than something explodes, a person turns who's not in an enemy's uniform, and then you realize, okay, now I'm in the fight and I have to react like you said. So we talked quite a bit about how can we be train skills that are proactive rather than reactively having teams in place to respond to the best that you can to your training. But rather than even falling to the level of your training after bang, how can that
Hmm.
training be emphasized proactively on the front end? So that proactive versus effective responses versus
Hmm.
reactions is the one that resonated with me again in so many realms of my life.
It really just comes down to two very specific skills when you're looking to get left to bang. First, it's that you can recognize the pre-event indicator, that you can know bang is coming. And then the second is being able to act on it. And that second piece sometimes gets forgotten because so much of left to bang, as we talk about in the book, is about situational awareness. A lot of the application of it is how are you identifying these pre-event indicators? Because naturally that is critical. If you don't know something is coming, there's nothing you can do about it. But once you identify that warning sign, once you identify that alert that, hey, something's on its way, you then have to act. And whether that act is to prevent something bad like an attack or pre-position yourself to be in a position to succeed, there has to be that second step as well. First recognize and then do something about it.
And then you took that book and that concept and, of course, created CP Journal. And
Hmm.
then you started working with organizations in the private sector to apply this concept at an organizational level, to think about
Yeah.
what is Bang uniquely for an organization in uncertain environments. And we can look back in the past at things like COVID or things like market changes for other reasons, or at an individual level, something that affects whatever is important to that company. And
Yeah.
that is part of this evolution that not only I've experienced through your writing on Substack, but getting to talk to you more, particularly in the recent white paper that you released. And
Yeah.
what one thing that really differed for me from what I've read in the book and what I've think about or thought about is the definition of, like, we talk about preparedness and readiness. Of course, in the military, we talk about it; in the fitness
Hmm.
realm, we talk about it in general. But sometimes people use those words interchangeably. We talk about capabilities and differentiating those so you can think about what are we doing as an organization, as a group to stay left of bang. That is where I've seen the evolution, and not only in your writing, but obviously, and how the business is operating. Tell me about that.
Hmm. Yeah. And that growth, and as you mentioned, right? So as I got out of the military, as my business partner and I started providing this training, a lot of it was focused on the behaviors, the threat recognition approach, and getting these concepts out there into the world. But we started to see the same pattern that we saw in the military, that we saw in the early days of the Iraq War, that we see in violence, start to emerge in emergency management and disaster related scenarios. Also seeing them in corporate security and crisis scenarios, and then just a variety of public safety incidents. And and all of these after action reports, they all started to sound the same to me. We didn't see it coming. We were overwhelmed early. We weren't able to respond or get ahead of events. And the impacts of that inability to get ahead were very real. And some of the examples that I oftentimes use, take Hurricane Helene, 2024. 252 people died. At least 106 of those people died in North Carolina, Western North Carolina. The hurricane didn't make landfall there, and still that many people were killed in the storm. July 4th, last year, 2025, 135 people died in Texas with river flooding, many of whom were little girls, little kids at a church camp on the river in an area referred to as Flash Flood Alley. The Texas Emergency Operations Center had activated 2 days before this in anticipation that this flooding could occur. And yet more people died in 2025 from that storm than they did in Hurricane Harvey, in 2017. 2018, Kyle, 85 people died when in a wildfire, when the campfire burned over the town of Paradise, California. 2023, 102, 103 people, I think, died when a wildfire ignited in Maui. 30 people died last January in the Los Angeles fires. February 2021, right? Winter Storm Uri down in Texas caused this power crisis. 246 people passed away during a winter storm. And I could go on, and I won't. I recognize that the list is probably not unnecessarily long, but I'm not judging anyone who was involved in any of these incidents. I wasn't there. I'm not Monday morning quarterbacking anything, but we cannot ignore the volume of people that lost their lives in these very predictable incidents, these very predictable storms. Those are nearly 850 people across just those 6 incidents whose lives were lost. All of their family, friends, lives irrevocably changed as a result of this. And if that is the same pattern that we had in the military when the Combat Hunter course, which the book talks about, it was this shift of recognizing we cannot accept these as acceptable risks. We cannot accept these as just part of the cost of doing business. We have to get ahead of these events, Kyle. And those events don't start at the impact, they start earlier. And that realization that this same problem that drove some of the innovations in the military were needed here at home to start to get ahead of a wide variety of disasters and disruptions and crises. And that realization is really what forced the evolution of these concepts from the tactical concept ultimately through all 3 layers of an organization. Sorry if I just
And
ranted at you over this, but it gets me going. Of these, would a left to bang approach have saved all of those lives? Maybe, maybe not, but it would absolutely have saved some. And I think that is the standard that we need to continue to move through if we're going to keep people safe here at home.
And like you said, you're working with these organizations primarily like in emergency management and crisis
Mhm.
response. And I think the parallel of natural disasters being a bang event really anywhere because of our technology, we can
Mhm.
predict potentially adverse conditions from weather. Sometimes they hit out of nowhere and things can change and it truly is uncertain.
Absolutely.
But typically there is some semblance of a timeline where we recognize
Mm.
potential of bang. And it's a very
Mhm.
interesting realm to consider and then try to translate to other organizations for what your respective bang could be, aside from natural disasters that could knock out the grid and your technology, but other things that could affect your operations. And I like how you
Mhm.
mentioned too, when you transitioned out of the military, you were applying these skills from left of bang to first responders,
Yeah.
of course, uh, police officers,
Security provider. Yep.
security, everybody, but like training the skills at the end user level, of course, just getting that out there to more people because it saves lives at the individual level. But this concept can apply at any scale, individually,
Mhm.
organizationally, globally, if we're all working
Mhm.
together on the same page. And that evolution again is starting to resonate with me quite a bit in some of the realms that I operate in professionally, but also just as a family, which you've had amazing
Mhm.
papers on preparedness within the home that we can talk about later on too. But you mentioned it's these after action reports and these patterns
Mhm.
that you're seeing. I would imagine with the ones that you mentioned, those are after action reports of situations gone wrong.
Yeah.
I would imagine you're also seeing patterns and after action reports of disasters where it went well too, to see different types of patterns.
Certainly. And it's really through the study of those that we started to hone in on these 3 different levels of left to bang. And we refer to these as the tactical level, operational level, and the strategic level. And the tactical level, this is what I often refer to as like domain specific knowledge or the ability to recognize threats or opportunities in a particular field. This is what the book is about: recognizing behaviors, establishing baselines, identifying anomalies. But that applies to other domains. These same concepts have been applied in cybersecurity with professionals identifying and detecting um, abnormal network behavior preceding a breach. It could be a meteorologist identifying atmospheric conditions, that precede hurricanes or tornadoes or winter storms. All of these different domains have the indicators that matter to them. And so that's really the tactical level. Oftentimes this is done, not always, but oftentimes done at the individual level, the person closest to the thing they are dealing with. At the operational level, this is where we really started to identify trends in the after action reports. Instead of doing this as individuals, it needs to be done by organizations, right? And this is significantly harder because there's more people and more people involved in more scenarios to consider. And the goal here is to connect signals to decisions and decisions to actions before something bad happens. And so this means organizations have to establish watch points, these decision thresholds where they will start to monitor events and start to just track progress a little bit more specifically. There's thresholds that we refer to as action points. What are those specific conditions when the organization is going to go from just monitoring events to beginning to pre-position resources or communicate with the public or communicate with their customers or their staff. And that is much harder than the individual because here you have to communicate these decisions across a number of different groups. The person who identifies the threat, it probably isn't the person who's going to make the decision about that. And that decision may be made by a committee or a group of people. And then the people who are going to implement plans, it could be a third group. And there's how you communicate and how you articulate the level of the sense of urgency and the level of importance of here's what we're seeing, here's why it matters, and here's why we're going to take action is so critical. And this breaks down an incident after incident after incident, just this communication uh, and situational awareness. And then, just briefly at the strategic level, this is about building the capabilities that an organization will need before the next disaster or the next disruption occurs. And so, this is to me the epitome of left of bang. It means leaders are assessing and defining the environment they operate in, identifying how their environment is changing, and then figuring out what capabilities, what functions will their organization need to succeed, and then investing in that so that they are ready and they are able, to actually start to not just adapt, but start to influence their environment. And just again, it's the equivalent of pre-positioning their team for whatever the future holds. And what we've found, kind of through our work is that organizations probably typically overinvest in one over the others. The tactical level gets significantly more attention than the operational or the strategic. But real readiness means that organizations and leaders are able to connect all three levels to create a true left to bang approach to the way that they work and the way that they operate.
Yeah, it's what you've done to scale it beyond the tactical level. And of course, tactical, operational, and strategic, military terms applied across the
Yeah.
board and great concepts for organizations anywhere. But to think about the level at which you're thinking about this capability, it makes sense that we have all of this training for the tactical skill of left of bang and we give people these
Mhm.
tools in the environments that they're operating. Fantastic. But if the mid-tier leaders that are running the projects or the strategic plan for the year aren't providing the resources to quit doing the same thing over and over when those skills are not
Mhm.
holding up for those bang scenarios and we're not pivoting, we're not changing, then that's the definition of insanity. We're doing the same thing over and over again. And then you take it a
Mhm.
step higher to the top level leaders within an organization. And if that is not part of the plan as a whole, where you're investing resources for the entire team, not just the ground forces, if you will,
Yeah.
now we're all on the same page. We're talking the same language. So no matter where a threat is detected, it is communicated, understood. And I love these touch points that you have too, where it's watching versus action. And if we have this kind of common sense language, you're not making up new acronyms like we tend to do in the military or the medical realm or other realms whatsoever. These are very understandable to anyone who reads any of your papers. And every time I do that, I think about here's what I can do in my organization right now, which is unrelated to who you're consulting with most often. But these concepts make so much sense. And then you have people talking something that aligns well. And alignment is something that you bring up quite a bit too, aligning everyone in the organization to what is truly preparedness. I'm curious, how are you defining preparedness now?
When I think about preparedness, it's an organization or an individual developing their ability to do something to a certain level. And, examples of that might be, law enforcement agency, right? They might need to prioritize mass notification or investigations or traffic stops. A fire department might be thinking about structure fire or search and rescue. A business might be prioritizing talent acquisition or business development or product development. Nonprofits often talk to us about fundraising and volunteer coordination and resource distribution. It doesn't matter to me what capabilities you develop, those need to come from the leader. Those need to be the things that will make or break your organization when bang occurs. And then preparedness is systematically building those capabilities and developing to a defined standard. And it's the standard piece that oftentimes is missing and it's a gap. And without it, it makes for the executive, when we're talking about strategic level, it makes resource allocation decisions really hard. Every time the budget comes up, do we invest in this program or do we say they're good enough, but we really need to develop this one? And making these decisions for time and effort and funds, when you don't have a structure and you cannot say this is the level this capability is able to perform at, and it's either good enough or not good enough, and this is what it's going to take, those decisions become really hard. And so if you want to talk about, kind of some of those metrics and the way that we're thinking of them, I'm happy to, but that is such a critical piece that enables teams and staff, maybe below that executive to go, okay, I know what I'm going to be held accountable for. I know what standard I am expected to perform to, and my team is expected to perform to. And once people have that clarity, it's usually roger that, let's go. And they can do it and they can build it. But when it's undefined, it just creates activity and it creates busyness and oftentimes just a real lack of structure, that spreads very quickly across an organization.
And this is what I like about your writing, your speaking, and how you use definitions so well. So, like when you define preparedness as a capability, and you're not giving, like, you can give specific examples for what you've experienced in your consultation of
Mhm.
companies. But when it's a capability that matters and something you need to do to meet a standard for that thing within your unique business, now it's open ended and it gets definable at the organizational level for what is important to them. And that it's so important because we tend to want concrete definitions and then we call preparedness. And that's why we start interchanging words and just applying them in the same way because we don't have a true
Yeah.
understanding of it. So when we think of like standards, a lot of times, whether it's military or other organizations, you think of performance standards for your job, your position description, and how you're meeting those standards for whatever it may be. But organizational standards and then your role within meeting that capability, which delineates and helps signify what your unique mission is. I am interested in how you are measuring and the metrics that you're using to measure that capability of preparedness, and then maybe
Mhm.
specific examples there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. The need for these standards and metrics really stems from the difference of left of bank preparedness versus right of bank preparedness. Right of bank preparedness is you are identifying problems after an incident occurred. And in this setting, more activity is better, right? Because you have this list of things that didn't go as well as they should have. There's a set of clearly scoped projects and problems that the more that you can do before the next incident, the better prepared you are. That breaks down when you go from only preparing for incidents that have already happened to preparing for incidents that could occur or may occur in the future. Because there is an infinite number of threats or hazards or opportunities that might be important for you, a more activity approach to preparedness burns out your team faster than anything, and you may not get any closer to actually being ready because there's not that structure of certainty of what exactly are we preparing for. And so the concept of defining these standards stems from that, to give people something concrete to aim towards. The definition that we use, oftentimes it's we are ready to do X, or we are ready for X to do Y to Z standards. And X, defines the conditions or the incidents that your organization is preparing for. Y defines the function that the organization must be able to perform. And then Z defines the level or the required level of performance. So we are ready for X to do Y to Z standards. And it just provides a simple and I don't say standardized, but as an executive delegates these out and provides um, kind of these thresholds to pursue, there is value in a certain amount of consistency across the organization where people can do this. And that becomes really important because you have to remember when we are left to bang, we are preparing in a speculative way. There is no guarantee that you'll ever need this capability. And there's no guarantee that this level of performance is what will be enough in the moment. We are making informed judgments and decisions about we believe that this will be the level for these reasons. And the executive still owns that responsibility of whether it's enough or not, but it does, offer a degree of concreteness to the work and the pursuit. And executives and teams can always adjust these standards, but it starts with having a really clear target to aim for. And then you can go into the work to actually build that capability and the ability to perform, a critical function.
And the simplicity of that sentence is important because you want simplicity of language when you describe core capabilities and how you're trying to build them. And if you can't, as an organization, say what your mission is and your core capabilities, we have a communication problem already. And now, if we
Hmm.
define how we're trying to build those capabilities because of recognized gaps or because of forecasts for what Bang could be, another thing that jumped out at me from your recent white paper that you kind of alluded to there is sometimes we look at it from a right of bang approach from experience-based preparedness, which was the term you used, and I really like that
Yeah.
because who doesn't operate that way at an individual organizational level? COVID happened, these natural disasters happen, market crash for this reason, like all these things happen and impact your organization. We don't want that to happen again, so we'll prepare specifically to that scenario, even though it's unlikely that exact scenario is going to happen again. So how we
Hmm.
determine what we want to prepare for, most of us tend to lean toward experience based because that's just how we operate. That's how our brains operate. Past experience
Hmm.
influences our predictions and responses in the future unless we can reorient and start thinking about changes in patterns. So, getting proactive in your preparedness and the delineation there. Talk to me a little bit about experience based preparedness versus proactive preparedness.
Yeah. And I struggled with that, component a little bit because, we're writing the white paper and we're trying to make the case for this is why a left to bang approach to preparedness is effective and this is how you do it. Um, and so we do need to set this dichotomy of are you left to bang? Are you right to bang? Are you experience based? Are you being proactive? There's a certain value, though, of experience based readiness. No one, a person who has felt the consequences or an organization that has dealt with the consequences of an event that they are not ready for, they are some of the most committed, most driven people of we are not going to let that happen again. We're going to do whatever it takes to do it because that pain was felt. And there's value in that. Oftentimes, some of our best clients are already, they're right of bang to one incident and they're saying, we're not letting that happen again. We're not doing that to our staff or our community. Let's make this shift. And so I don't want to minimize it or attack it too much because it is real. And, truly, you can't, um, you get your best evaluation of a function, whether it's selling something or responding to something when you're doing it. The challenge is you never know if that next incident is going to be relatively small in a good test environment or if it's going to be the big event, the thing that's going to make or break you. And so we just need to figure out, well, what are these metrics that we can pursue that are indicators that we are ready and indicators that we have actually developed the capability to a sufficient level, to the best of our judgment. And when we do that, when you look at experience-based approaches, something you'll see, and we do a lot of interviews with chiefs and executives and security directors and emergency managers to understand how they're applying this, and we can hear it right away. It kind of results in these personas that we can talk about, but it's people who immediately go after an incident, we do more training, we buy more stuff, we buy more gear, and the training comes up it's first almost every single time. But I kind of excuse me, I kind of laugh at that though, because, no problem has ever been solved by more PowerPoint. Like, oh, if someone could lecture me just a little bit longer, we would have been so much more ready for this. That's not how it works, right? Oftentimes there's no framework, there's no process, there's no plans that is guiding the training, or there's no practice that's occurring after the training occurred, or there's not the right equipment, or if you have equipment, it's not tied into the plans, or people don't know how to use it. And so it allowed us to really look at what goes into a capability, Kyle. And it's, we break it down in these 5 parts. There's plans, right, which are define how the organization intends to operate and what they intend to do. And these provide structures and outline responsibilities, and make sure that people have a shared understanding of how the organization is going to operate. You have people, right? These are the individuals, the specific staff members or partners who are responsible for executing those plans and performing those functions. You have resources, right? The supplies, the equipment, the technology, the funding that is necessary to execute the plan. And then you have skills, not just the presentations or the training or the education, but also the practice and the repetitions to know I can do this and I've got enough practice in it and I can be confident performing it. And then validation is the 5th element. And this determines whether the capability actually works. Ideally, this is done left of bang before it's being tested, but it's also done, when instance occurs and when those capabilities are actually implemented. And by breaking these capabilities down into 5 pieces, you can look at it holistically. You can figure out maybe we need more training, or maybe we do need more equipment, but maybe we haven't given our staff enough repetitions to be confident, or maybe our processes and the way that we think information is going to flow, or the way that we think we're going to make decisions, maybe that doesn't make sense in the real world. And so just let's someone figure out, hey, this is the biggest problem. This is the choke point that we have to deal with first. And we can make that decision with a little bit more information than we would otherwise.
Your white paper, just like your response to my question right now, was beautifully nuanced when it came to experience-based versus proactive. And you highlighted the benefits of previous experience so you can recognize bank scenarios and what went wrong, to recognize gaps, to then
Mhm.
start defining capabilities that you need to build. And I would imagine that when you start defining what those events are potentially in the future, you can maybe reframe, like, not a specific event in the exact way, but a conceptual event, and then start translating
Mhm.
it to other things that can impact you, so those previous experiences don't happen again the same way. And I love what you said, that some right of bang organizations that are activity driven and getting after it are some of the most passionate people, because they don't want that to happen again. So I appreciate you
Mhm.
highlighting that, because we have to use previous experience. We do it naturally. But if we're
Yeah.
only reacting, if we're only, which I'm smiling as you're talking, because for a while in the military, we would do trainings after events and have mandatory trainings that checks in the boxes, but we don't do that anymore. I'm just kidding. We still do it all the time.
I was like, oh man, that's
No,
incredible. Yeah.
no, but it makes sense, right? So then, like, some
Mhm.
event happens, you want to make sure everybody's on the same page about it, so you provide a training. But how do we know if that training worked or not? Are we measuring standards or skills derived from that training in any way? Do we have projects or ways to stress test that in any capacity? No, it takes more time, it takes more resources, and so no, we just get the reactive trainings, and then it's done until the next one. So you
Mhm.
expand upon that to actually utilize previous experience to make it help develop a capability that can be tested. I'm probably getting into your definitions of readiness now, but how do you define readiness as a component of preparedness, developing the capability and the training around that to stay left of bang?
Yeah, and it's I think I've accidentally drifted between, preparedness and readiness even just through this, conversation, but readiness is that state of, okay, we are ready to perform to X, Y, and Z, right? And with that definition, preparedness are the activities, the actions that we are doing in order to achieve that. And sometimes when they get used interchangeably, we have attained preparedness, or we've attained a prepared state. No, you've gone through preparation. You've done those preparedness activities, and now you're ready, or you're ready to perform at this, defined level. And that then just allows for this degree of clarity that everyone can, have of, there's fewer assumptions about what someone is going to do or how well they're going to be able to do it. And once that is understood, then you start to get that independent action that, going back to a military context, when everyone knows what everyone else is doing and how well they're going to do it, things just flow. There's a lot of just cohesiveness, and just things look really smooth because everyone's on the same page. But it didn't look like that on day one. And so they had to go through that planning, they had to go through the training, they had to go through the practice, they had to get the equipment, they had to build their familiarization first at the individuals, then the squad level, then the platoon level, then the company level, before you could put 3 or 4 companies online and actually do it in a real, you know, exercise, or, a battalion for the Marines, a battalion level attack.
Yeah. Now, you've done this in the white paper and many other posts that you've created. And how you describe readiness as a state, it just resonates with me, not only from the first time I read your book to how I think about it at an
Mhm.
individual level for resilience, but now how I think about it at an organizational level and things that you emphasize. But I'll ask you the questions because you would describe it better than I would. How do you
Hopefully.
determine readiness? How do you test for it to have confidence in it?
Mhm. Scenarios, simulations, exercises, ways that you can test to the highest level possible in these, you know, still, blue sky conditions. It's not an exact mirror of, maybe combat conditions or, disaster conditions, but it gets you as close as you can to, just assess these are the people who are doing really well. This is what we need to focus on next. And I tie it back to, sports. If you look at NFL preseason at the end of training camp. First, they have training camp, and then they do some, preseason scrimmages. Those scrimmages are not at the same intensity that the playoffs are, right? It's people don't want to get hurt, and so it's a good enough test. It's providing the coach and everyone with feedback, about where they are, but it's just the closest standard that they could get to. And again, we are again as we look forward, right? This is speculative. There's is certain level, an inherent level of uncertainty about what will be needed, but we're just starting to reduce that and gain a little bit of clarity in where are we, and is this the level that we will actually need? Yes or no?
Yeah, and it's using that sentence that you provided. We are ready
Mhm.
for X to do Y to a Z standard. So, okay, what is that
Yeah.
Z standard? What are you doing? And then
Mhm.
are you ready for that? So, creating
Mhm.
what you've emphasized in a lot of your posts lately, projects to test
Mhm.
just that, like making projects
Yeah.
value add and not just activity driven and another check in the box because you're doing something, but using that
Mhm.
standard to test it in a project. That's another thing that's been jumping out as like, yes, here's how we can actually test readiness. So preparedness efforts to get to that state can actually be definable and can be clear and have clarity like you've been talking about.
Mhm. And, as you think about that, again, if I could just go back to football, for a moment, look at a team whose starting quarterback gets hurt and they have to either bring in the backup who is a rookie, and that rookie does not start with the full playbook. That team's level of readiness goes down because they are down to a handful of plays that they know that this rookie can run confidently. And then over time, that playbook expands and they can maybe get back to that same level that they had with their previous quarterback, but it just contracts based on, okay, we lost a key person. That means the capability is not performing to the same standards. We've got someone new. They could be good, but we've got our work to do in order to get there. It's no different if you're looking at tactical teams or business operations. As people come and go, not all of this can be always articulated. There's a certain amount of inherent skills and knowing this person can make great decisions, in crisis situations, and this person talks a great game, but the minute things go wrong, right, you're going to watch, and they're not going to be at the maybe not the same level they thought they would be, and that's really important for those leaders who are making decisions of again, where are we going to put our money, which projects are we going to pursue, how are we going to get a little bit better, because you can't solve it all at once. It's just a series of initiatives of taking steps to address the next gap and move a little bit further forward.
Yeah. And like, as I read these posts from you, as I have this conversation with you, all these ideas come into my head of like ways that I can apply it to my life professionally and personally. However, to get everybody on the same page and to articulate the same way you do becomes a challenge. So I've honestly tried that in different ways and I've implemented some things that I've learned from you in the roles that I have professionally now. But it obviously you're benefited by having the expert themselves, the person doing this facilitation all the time themselves. And that's what you do with CP Journal now. So like what you
Mhm.
put in your white paper, you've been able to create that because you guys have been doing strategic briefs with organizations for some time, helping them with these definitions, creating these sentences at their unique level. Tell me about that evolution and what you're doing with strategic
Yeah.
briefs and another thing that you're offering through CP Journal.
Yeah. And I appreciate your comment, but I would put it back, on you as well. My mission in life, and it's based off of admittedly being right of bang. When I look back at the deployments that I did at 22, 23, 24 years old overseas, a lot of what I'm writing about, a lot of what I'm focused on is sometimes they're the things that I wish I had prior to deploying, or the structures that I wish I had, or the skills that I wish I had. And so the way that we prepare is just a personal passion of mine. And I had a boss once who talked about passion as being this combination of love and anger, right? And that is it for me. I'm committed to this field, and I'm also have that little bit of anger that I didn't have some of these things
Yeah.
before I was in harm's way. And it's not to blame anyone, but it is now to contribute to that system to make sure that if someone wants those skills, I learn more from your post about in videos and podcasts about resilience and fitness and so many other things. But you think about that way more than I do, and so yeah, I think it's one of the beauties, I think, of Substack, of you get to find people who are talking about and thinking about these topics at really deep levels and thinking about it often every single week and sharing that. And I think it creates just I don't know, a unique community of what you can get on some of these platforms, as opposed to other ones where it's just anger and people, yelling at each other. all day. I don't even remember what your question was, Kyle.
No,
I'm
I'll
sorry.
bring it back,
Yeah.
and that
Okay.
definition of passion, that one's staying with me, and we
Yeah.
all have things that we're passionate about, and when it comes to resilience, that definition is spot on for me, so I
Mhm.
love it because of the changes I've made from the anger I have toward past experiences, not at anyone or anything, but just, "Hey,
Mhm.
if I had this mindset and these skills, maybe I could have responded better," but at the same time, I try to reframe that a little bit. Gratitude for those past things because it led me to where I am today. I'm still alive, so I can do something with it. But it does come from a both love and anger standpoint. So the
Mhm.
things we're passionate about is experience based, and now we're trying to be proactive about it. And
Yeah.
there's your passion coming through your
Yeah.
writing. My
Yeah.
question was,
I should give credit. It was Brock Long, former FEMA administrator. Yeah, that's where I heard it. It was
hell yeah, Brock,
not
well
me.
done.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna quote him in one of my daily reflection quotes for passion and
Can't
expand
wait.
upon
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So my question was, what you're doing with your company? You're giving these strategic briefs now
Mhm.
on the things that you're writing about, but you are like, again, I read your stuff and I come up with these ideas, but as I try to articulate them to my teammates and then unpack it in a certain way. I do a decent job, but it's much better to get it through a facilitator. I mean, it's not like we would partner forever, but to come in and have professionals who are passionate about this, dealing with it every day, have other after
Mhm.
action reports made with similar organizations and talk about it. Tell me about your strategic briefs, when you started
Yeah.
doing that and kind of how you're delivering that for organizations to help them with some of these definitions individually.
Yeah. And so the strategic briefs that we do are designed um, to help an organization's senior leadership team see the problem with the way they are preparing from the same perspective. And I say problem, not every organization has a problem, but the ones that reach out and the ones that we were talking to, there's someone in that organization who has self identified of we are not preparing as deliberately as we could. We are missing opportunities, or things feel too chaotic, or we're losing staff members as a result of our lack of preparedness. We need to figure this out. But because preparedness is used very loosely and in different situations, and as you talk to 4 or 5 people from a senior leadership team, they're all thinking about different experiences from their life or that they dealt with in the last week. And so the strategic briefing starts with helping them realize where on the bang timeline are they. And there's 4 different personas that we use to kind of clarify how an organization pursues their readiness and how they approach preparedness. And it's not that these personas are all encompassing or the only way to do it, but we've found that we need to get people talking using the same terms with the same understanding so that the organization as a group can figure out, yes, we have a problem. And then, you know, while we can guide and make recommendations and show different models of the way they can prepare, they have to choose the one that is right for them. No police department, 2 police departments are exactly the same. They have different chiefs and different priorities and different staffs and different communities. And so they have to choose models that work for them with where they are, what their expectations are, how they assess their future operating environment, and the availability and the capacity to actually then prepare. People have different budgets or different time available and different demands on their jobs day to day. And so thinking about what's our problem, making sure that they are in agreement about this is where they are. And it doesn't always have to be an exact agreement. These, when you get to a senior leadership team, there's perspectives and there's experience that have allowed individuals to get there, but they have to be close enough and they have to be committed to, okay, are we going to do the work to then build that capability, but for the way that we prepare? What are the structures that we are going to use to guide the project selections, the things that we're going to invest in? How are we going to assign responsibility throughout the organization for who is going to own these different capabilities, and what does that reporting structure look like? Resources, what tools they need, skills, training. Oftentimes, when we look at senior leadership teams, especially in public safety, Kyle, the people who get promoted, first, this was a police department from, police officer to sergeant, sergeant to lieutenant, lieutenant to deputy chief and chief. After their initial training, there's very little there that's formed. Just the best people are oftentimes getting promoted, and then they're, hey, you'll figure it out, you seem pretty smart. There's no structure for them. And so oftentimes when we look at the skills of the way an organization prepares, it's not in the delivery of training, it's in how do you manage a program, how do you assess this capability as a program, and then understand the way all of those just the way the organization works to fund it and to invest in it as well. And so
So
the
I
strategic briefing is really guided to get them to an agreement. Or sometimes, the answer is they don't get to an agreement in terms of, hey, maybe we're okay. We just got to tweak a couple things, which is also great. But it's they're getting there, speaking the same language, not talking past each other, and that's really the intent of the briefings that we run.
So it helps them come up with maybe where they are on the bang timeline, maybe the pattern or persona, as you're calling it, from where they
Hmm.
currently are, and then explore ideas for if is that where you want to be, or what else can we do to move a direction that we want to. I imagine most people don't want to move right, but you have these four
Yeah,
patterns
sometimes.
or
Yeah.
yeah, you have
Yeah.
these four patterns or personas. And that post just came out recently. I actually read that after your white paper, which was only a few weeks ago. And
Hmm.
again, just another one that resonated deeply because every one of them makes sense. And like you said, they're not all encompassing, but even the constrained pattern is so
Hmm.
relevant and so um, common, if you will, in many
Yeah.
environments due to things outside of control, whether it's loss of staff, whether it's, of course, an unpredictable event that you weren't prepared for. So bang happened and you're still trying to recoup and regather.
Hmm.
I'm curious that as we talk through the different patterns or personas, did you come up with these from these strategic briefs that you've been doing? Did you come up with them from after action reports that you mentioned in the past where the same patterns were coming
Hmm.
from, a combination? Where'd they come from? And then let's talk through the four different ones.
Yeah, these personas came from truly countless interviews with police and fire chiefs, security directors, emergency management directors, some business owners. And these interviews are set up to understand how are you preparing in practice. And so as we developed the framework that we present in the white paper, I mean, I'm a simple Marine, Kyle, it's got to be practical. It has to be tied to reality. An academic framework that is abstract doesn't help those people who are already time constrained and already have 1,000 things going on in their day. And so we started these interviews just to understand how organizations are doing this in practice and to ground truth our framework against their demands. And so through these interviews, we just started to identify these different patterns. This wasn't something that we had designed the interviews and conversations for. They just naturally started to emerge as we asked these questions of, how are you choosing what you're going to prepare for? And you hear it right away. There's organizations that say, we are looking at after action reports and the problems that we just encountered, and we're preparing for those things. Like, great, you're what we would call that activity driven organization. You're just right of bang, and you're busy as hell, and you're working hard, but it's all based on things that have already happened. Through these interviews, there were people that we would come across who preparedness, Kyle, just wasn't a priority, and that's not a bad thing or a criticism. It's just their reality. They are so busy day to day. They don't have the option right now of prioritizing preparedness. And sometimes there's a lack of agency or a sensing, a lack of the ability to influence this. Great. We're going to call you the constrained organization. We're going to put you a little bit further right of bang because you are only preparing not just with little problems, but when something went really bad. And now you're being mandated to do this. Third, we have what we refer to as the transitional organization. This is the organizations that are trying to move left of bang. So they're just left of bang on the timeline. They recognize the need. Hey, we've got to get ahead of these things. We cannot keep reacting, cannot keep doing this to our staff. But the approach is still pretty inconsistent or it's not institutionalized just yet. This is more often than not what we see as personality driven systems where an executive or a chief or someone very high up in the organization, they recognize this need and they're just committed to doing whatever it takes to move their organization left of bang because they realize the impacts if they don't do this. The problem is there's this constant pull back right of bang because their stakeholders, their groups, that they work with, they want to react with that certainty that comes with a right of bang preparedness. Sorry about that.
You're good.
And then the challenges with the personality driven systems, when that executive leaves the organization, that system goes with them. And so oftentimes organizations might revert back or there's a higher degree of disruption when that happens. Then there's the fourth group. This is kind of the model, and it's the truly proactive organizations. They sit to the far left of Bang on the timeline. They have a capability driven, structured approach to preparedness. And most organizations sit between that activity driven and that transitional, closest, just right, just left of Bang. And they're working to get past, kind of some of those initial hurdles. And, we're there just to help them take these lessons that we were learning from all these different agencies and organizations that we work with to get past the very predictable ones and to help build those structures that they need to continue accelerating beyond just that transitional group and truly make it an institutional way that they operate, the way that they prepare. And as a result, these organizations, you see this culture and this mindset, and not just morale and other intangibles, but people want to work there because they are service driven. They are mission oriented professionals, and people recognize that group recognizes when they are in an organization that sees that, is on the same mindset, and is building the structures that enable that and accelerate that into the people that can truly impact their communities or their businesses or their organizations. They know when they're in an organization that is set up for them to succeed, and those that are fine being right at Bang and reacting and a little bit, just behind events a little bit as well. But every organization, they're where they are. It just is, and it's just a matter of recognize and define that starting point, so you can help make customized and clear recommendations for, because you're doing these things, this is where I think you should start. And those recommendations are not just based on gut feeling or intuition or scientific journal, but it's based on how other organizations are doing this as well.
Yeah, I love it. And like I say this often, just as many other dudes, but like understanding the why is imperative. So everyone understands the
Hmm.
mission, the book start with why, and many other things like
Hmm.
understanding and being able to explain that why is imperative. However, also understanding the how, not at an individual level, which is where most people get to the how and the what. So you describe your job and maybe you could teach how to do your particular job, but
Hmm.
understanding the how of the organization to get to that readiness state, the how of the not only the why, but how we're all doing it and the why within that how. Like you have these other levels that you're talking about here when it comes to these capabilities that we are trying to develop through projects, through aligned communication at the tactical, operational, strategic level. You're adding understandable language to these things to get everyone on the same page for what it is that matters to get and stay left of Bang. And those patterns make a lot of sense. And I'm curious because you've written about other offerings through your company. So the strategic brief
Hmm.
being one that you've talked about already, and you have this. I think it's called the Preparedness as a Capability Advisory Council
Yeah.
or Advisory
Hmm.
Facilitation. Is
Yeah.
that something that happens after you start determining maybe the persona and the opportunities? And that is that like a subsequent thing that can be done to help start working through? And what is that?
Yeah, it depends on the organization of kind of their level of clarity. There are some organizations that we talk to that are just like, hey, we have problems. We're not doing any of these things. And oftentimes it's leaders who are saying, I don't know what my runway is. We cannot wait. We cannot stall. And so this is really that work alongside that senior leadership team or an executive to help them build out their structures for the way they prepare, from defining their core capabilities, talking to those, experts in their organization of, well, what does success look like here? What standards should we be pursuing? And the advantage of supporting organizations as an outsider, it's they still have 1,000 things that they're doing day to day. So we become just a temporary, surge in capacity where we can help them build this structure. Because these are the things that are oftentimes they acknowledge as being really important, but not as urgent as the fire that they are metaphorically or literally, putting out. And so it just helps build that structure that can come after that strategic briefing if that organization says, yeah, we do have some challenges and we would like some support going forward. But it's also not required that
Yeah.
briefing, or even just, if the organization has the capacity to do it. Hopefully the paper and the articles that we put up on the site, we write those and we put those there so that it can be accessible to anyone, so that it doesn't require me or a member of our team or someone else that we work with to come out. It should be able to be done by everyone, because this should be truly not only institutionalized, but also just available, across any field, any profession, anyone who wants to get there.
And you see, that's what you've been doing since you and Jason Riley wrote Left of Bang, you guys are
Hmm.
trying to create that book just to get it out to more people, to
Yeah.
understand that capability of situation awareness at a tactical level. And then now what you're doing with your company, you're basically trying to teach yourself out of a job. So like if you can read your Substack and get all the information you need and have everybody that's passionate about the same thing of, yes, we need to do this and do it yourself, fantastic. If not, you have these other options for the strategic brief,
Mhm.
for the advisory facilitation. And then
Yeah.
in that, you're hopefully getting everyone aligned to, again, teach yourself out of a job, which is so cool. The best kind of
If
coach.
we end up in a spot where there's just no more crises, no more disasters, no more disruptions, I'll retire very happy. We don't want to do it forever. We're going to do it because it needs to be done because lives are still getting lost. And until we get to that point where these things are not impacting our neighbors, our families, ourselves, there's ways that we can improve. And, um, it's probably that, some of those military things that get just ingrained in you, but I cannot accept that there's an acceptable loss here. And until that system is so well honed and iterated on and then used where we've just got it, there's room that we can improve. But one of the things that really struck me as I got out of the Marines and started working with public safety agencies is there is no chain of command, right? There is no from the commander of the Joint Chiefs down through service, you know, everything where there's connected from top to bottom. Every city, every county across the country, they're their own thing. It's not federal government, gives commands to the states and states give commands to counties and then down to cities. Every organization does this a little bit different. So they have to define their standards that work for them, that work for their community, that are going to make sense and go through this. And there's pros and cons, to that structure, but it's the style of government that we have. And so, working through the site, applying, these lessons learned that, also very graciously the clients and the organizations that we get to work with, when we talk to them and say, hey, there's something here that is not just a lesson for you. I would like to share this through the site to others. And the response is always, absolutely. If this can help someone else, yeah, let's not keep it a secret. Let's put it out there. Obviously, we'll take their name out of it or their structure or something that doesn't tie them to it. But if there's a lesson that can help others, it's just very rewarding, to work with the community of professionals that are committed to, yeah, we can do better and our community deserves better than what we're doing today.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because if you're ignorant like me and you don't work in the public safety space, particularly in the private sector, you would make the assumption that like wildfire management or crisis response, law enforcement, you name it. Like an after action report, you'd find best practices and you just apply it to every state and every situation. And maybe conceptually, there's things that can be learned. Whether or not you've access to that in the first place probably is quite different. But at the same time, there's going to be unique state and local things that you need to consider. So it does become different in a variety of ways, whether it's and then staffing and other dynamics of the city and everything else that you have to take into consideration. So you can get lost in the sauce pretty quick without having some guidance that makes sense.
Every state, Kyle, for the most part, every state is different
Yeah.
with this and the way they work. And there was nothing I was more right of bang to coming out of the military than understanding like, so who's in charge? And it's like everybody's in charge. You're like, oh, all right, great. How can I help? Right? It was
Yeah.
just, it took a little while to learn and understand this. And again, there's a lot of people along the way who said, like, all right, sit down, let's talk through this and let me explain this to you. But I'm very appreciative of that. But it's just the nature of a very distributed environment. And so the way that we have built our business, kind of going to your point from writing Left of Bank, because these concepts had to get out there, and that guided the values that, and allowed the CP Journal to start and then grow was we're going to make this successful because this is the system, this is the environment that we have. And if we can influence or help those leaders who are trying to do this across the country, that's our only goal, and to make it accessible for them.
Beautiful. Now, this is, I don't know if it's like a weird question or a difficult question to answer.
Hit
Um,
me. Yeah.
but like when you look at all the experience you have now over the past many years in doing what you're doing with CP Journal, interviews, strategic briefs, working with these different entities, in the emergency management, for example, are there certain capability gaps, so patterns, if you will, globally that you're finding are opportunities in general? Are there not only like
Yeah.
organizational patterns that you come up with, but like general capability gap opportunities that could be applied even across organizations just for considerations?
Absolutely. So first, situational awareness and information sharing. Um, Decisions cannot be made without information. Of course, you can make decisions with limited information, all of that. But when people have disparate bits of information, bits of data, they're making decisions from not the same understanding of what they're facing. And so defining what those thresholds are, defining what those indicators are, and then building the structures to build a true common operating picture where people can operate with the same level of understanding, that is more often a breakdown than it isn't. And that is not always easy to build, but it is critical of how are we getting information out to the right people with the right packaging and everything else to inform decisions at the speed that disasters and crises and combat and everything else demand. So that is one. The second relates to oftentimes resource management in crises and disasters. You need more stuff than you have. And that ability to surge resources in, first understanding what is needed, getting them moving, getting them to an incident scene fast enough, and then not only just getting them there, then you have to integrate them into the response. And there's organizational structures and leadership positions that are necessary to, like deploying overseas, to receive people, give them briefs, get them assignments, get accountability, get them out, make sure they understand the area they're working in, because when you think about mutual aid at the city and county level, people coming in may have no understanding of the area that they're working in, and they're doing it under intense wildfire smoke or severe weather or after a tornado came through. And so the orientation is limited. And so how you not only identify resources, but surge them and then get them operational. The third being um, continuity of operations or business continuity, mission assurance, maybe on the military side, of being able to operate when your operations have been disrupted, and knowing that could be personnel, that could be facilities, that could be resources or technology. The ability to adapt, go back down to basics of what is your organization responsible for, and figure out how are we going to continue providing these things regardless of what we're facing. Easier said than done, but it's a critical capability. The fourth is public information and communication, especially in public safety, right? Let's say we're talking about evacuations. That is, right, to have a successful evacuation, the public needs to evacuate. So you have to be communicating, you have to be sharing information, recognizing that the same delays that you had in understanding the situation, understanding what is needed, and then navigating through wildfire smoke after a tornado or hurricane or anything, that's really hard for people who have not trained how to do this. And so the more clearly you can communicate, the more consistently you can provide updates in an environment, frankly, that is getting way harder with the AI and the deep fakes and just the blatant misinformation that is here to cause chaos. So how we're communicating. And then the kind of fifth and the final one that always comes up is communication between disparate groups. Whenever we run exercises, let's say we're testing an organization in response, we will provide data inputs to them over the radio, over phone calls, over emails, over text messages, over messaging apps, and there's so much information coming from so many different channels. Sometimes you know, two people can have radios, but those radios might not be able to talk, and just hitting them on every different platform possible to recreate. These are the conditions. This is what it'll look like in real life. And so those kind of five things are all often things that are coming up in after action reports that we can improve upon.
Few things jumped out at me. You mentioned the critical capability of understanding your core capabilities, which is funny, but like that being a pattern, that's familiar to me too, because you think of all the things that your company can
Mhm.
do and you want to do them all well. But if you spread yourself too thin, you keep trying to do too many things well, that then vulnerabilities can happen. And then when bang happens, things can break down a lot faster. So
Yeah.
understanding your core capabilities and ensuring those are properly prepared to a ready state
Mhm.
is a critical capability in of itself. I really like
Yeah.
that. And then the audiologist in me loves what you're talking about, communication. Someone I worked with a few years ago, he's since retired now. I was practiced already, but like he said it so succinctly that I regurgitate it all the time. But just good communication, good relationships. So like
Hmm.
the how important it is in the spheres of not only influence you have, but operations, the area of responsibility that you operate in, regardless of how much you like the people you work with or collaborate with, finding a way to develop good relationships with them because of the shared mission you have and the
Yeah.
ability to share information as efficiently as possible is imperative when it comes
Hmm.
to collaborative response to not only those uncertain extreme events, but even the mild ones. So you guys can
Hmm.
continue to grow and effectively
Yeah.
execute your missions. And then a term we're using in the military now um, is resilient communications, which is funny because like that's a very much emerging
Hmm.
two of my biggest areas of passion. But it highlights what you're talking about in today's day and age. And the resilience is often around kind of the hardening and the trusted aspect of not only keeping the communications secure internally and preventing external influence of either tapping or
Hmm.
disrupting or changing. But also the clarity and that the ability to have a better signal noise ratio and the really extreme environments people are operating in, but making sure that
Yeah.
communication is trusted, secure, and efficient is becoming more challenging in a lot of these environments for some of the reasons that you alluded to too. So those are interesting patterns and cool to hear and important for many to consider when it comes to how we are all operating wherever we are.
And so to me, like what you just said goes back to that the X, Y, and Z, right? Because we're just changing, okay, because our environment is changing, this is the new standard. And that might require changing a plan or doing more training because if we can't communicate as much as we would like, we have to be able to operate and just with a little more uncertainty or a little bit understanding of how what you're responsible for in general when that just in time component disappears. But when you hear that, okay, this is where the environment's going. These are the challenges that we're facing. We better go back. And it's when you change that standard, everything else downstream just naturally can be assessed really clearly of like, okay, what do we have to do for this? And what will that impact be if we don't address it either?
Yep. Too simple, but at the same time, not easy if you just get used to the routines that you operate in. So having this kind of framework, so helpful. I've been on Substack now for a few years, and my first kind of year and a half, I definitely became a paying subscriber to many accounts. There's just so many amazing writers out there that offer all of these cool things. But then when you start consuming at a certain level and you have all these other things you're doing, you have to kind of reorganize, determine what
Hmm.
stays and what doesn't. So I've been on here long enough to where I still subscribe to these accounts, but maybe not a paying subscriber without question. A account that I will stay a paying subscriber to as long as you write and keep it open is yours. And it's not only because I love your writing, but because you offer unique products through the CP Journal that are just outstanding. We've talked about many today, but one that you came out recently as well, which I shared and talked to you about, which I just
Hmm.
found so well done. And I know that you're going to build upon it more, was the personal and home preparedness series that
Yeah.
you created. And if people can see, if you're watching our conversation, if you're not, I have one of my bookshelves behind me. And with the 5 or so bookshelves that we have in this house, I have quite a few on preparedness in different domains. But what you wrote succinctly, and I think that was like 8 different posts within that series about
Hmm.
personal preparedness, your ability to say so much with such few words is a skill in and of itself. But it made me think, and what we've been talking about tonight, okay, like what are these things that I can start doing to determine my readiness? Who cares how much gear I have if I'm not
Hmm.
training it? But even if I'm training it, is it applying to what I really need for what those bank scenarios might be for me and my family? Am I including my family? What other ways can I assess what I'm doing? What motivated you to write that? And kind of what ways are you thinking about evolving it?
What led me to write it was we started to get reached out to by people asking us questions because we're working in this field. Hey, what are your thoughts on this? But personal individual preparedness was never my focus or kind of the thing that we were doing with clients. And as these requests came in, we started just to look at, well, who, like, I didn't have anyone to recommend either. Hey, I'm not the guy for that, but you should go look at them. As I looked at all of these different, sites and providers and stuff, it's just mess. It's just madness out there. It's just people promoting a lot of gear because it's all based on affiliate links. It's all based on fear of the zombies are coming, Armageddon is coming, the Civil War's already started, right? And it's all based on fear because fear sells because it creates panic. And then it's based on, buy these things. And then you stop and you talk to people. They're like, oh, I've got this great water filtration system. You're like, great, can you use it? Well, no. Or like, I don't have any water near me. Like, what are you going to use that thing for? Like, you spend a lot of money on it, or they have pantries full of food that they don't know how to cook, right? Because they're not tied to the way that they make dinner day to day. And it just frustrated me that people are making decisions from providers, and it's, everyone's got their own thing. It's not being critical of them, but I don't think that fear is the best way to do that. And I think that there's some structure, and there's, if you can handle whether it's the first 72 or 96 hours of an incident, you become a massive asset, by the way, to your community. You are one less household that your government has to think about, or, okay, are there problems? Are there rescues that are needed? When you can effectively not shelter in place, protect in place, or evacuate your home, you become you make the problem set that those first responders or those public safety professionals are dealing with. You just made it a little bit smaller and a little bit easier to address. And it just comes down to education, and I think hopefully coherent recommendations about here's where to start. If you want to go past that, by all means, but start with these basics first.
And coherent for sure, because again, it wasn't that long. I thought I was going to plan it to read over a few days. I thought it was going to be really long posts. They weren't that long, but again, the practicality, the considerations that make so much sense, just like you're doing organizationally with CP Journal now. Yes, of course, and like how you organize it, how you consider it, some things that you may find in other books, but converging of all the things that make sense without all the other things that you just mentioned. Just here is your first step for consideration, and if you can get to this, I would call that a readiness state. Like you said, you can consider other things for unique
Absolutely.
scenarios, but that is getting to readiness from a home preparedness standpoint for about 72 to 96 hours. And then you talk about, of course, whether that is protect in place or whether that is evacuate elsewhere. So you have different chapters on that. But man, well done, brother. I'm
Well,
going to
thank
be
you.
rereading that one. That one is saved. But it's stuff like that. These other unique products that you have, including all the trainings that you've done in the past that are part of that. It's just so many
Mhm,
resources to your account, let alone the posts that you keep coming out with. The value add is
mhm.
incredible.
That's the sole goal, right? That's what we're looking to do. And I feel like I'm like just an unpaid champion of Substack, but I appreciate your comments on, the articles and the writing that goes into it. One of the things I think is so amazing is you get to pick and choose the writers that you follow, and you see different styles and you test them out over time. And I look back at articles I wrote even just a couple of years ago. You're like, oh man, that looks horrible. Or I couldn't have broke that into 2 paragraphs. Like, that can't be read on a phone. And just seeing these different people who all have really unique styles, it influences the writing. And then it, to a certain degree, challenges you to, okay, how can I said this in 4 sentences. Can I make it one? How short can I get it? Because people are busy. Okay, I can't do one, but maybe 2 sentences. Okay, got it. And just that, I think that bar that when you follow really good people, yourself and a lot of the people that we're mutually connected with, um, it's a constant challenge of, okay, I got to do a little bit better next time around.
I couldn't agree more. It's such a
Mm.
fun form of intentional stress, if you will. Not only the skill of trying
Yeah.
to write what you're passionate about, but willing to make it public facing, willing to take heat in the variety of ways that we might, or just also
Yep.
connect with other people that you admire. And then
Hmm.
whether they like it or don't, it's just such a weird realm, but such a wonderful realm to operate
It
in
is.
because connections like this happen. You learn more things. And while I love creating the different things that I'm trying to do now, it is purely a passion project. I consume probably 80/20 when it comes to
Mm.
my like what I get out of Substack. Like I'm glad I provide some 20% there, but 80% of it is consumption and it is all value add. I'm getting better about not consuming too much, but yours, brother, that will stay for sure. And getting to talk to you again about how you
Thank you.
evolve left of bang, man, it's something else, and it's going to be cool to see where you keep taking it in different ways. And without question, you can consider not only in what you're doing with CP Journal, but what's so cool about what you teach is you can start applying it to other realms of life in ways that you're not even, like you said, you weren't even thinking about personal preparedness, but you get these
Mhm.
questions and then you create this series pretty quickly, I would imagine, just using the same concept, very practical, very honest. And you see how these concepts and the method of instruction you have can apply anywhere. So it'll be cool to see what else comes out in other realms when it comes to staying left of bang.
I got some ideas for the next few months that we're getting close on, adding a few more onto
Hell
the
yeah.
site. So
I can't
we'll
wait.
keep you
This has been an
informed.
honor as
Yeah.
always. Talk
Yeah.
soon.
Thank you so much, Kyle.
Remember, all the knowledge in the world means little unless you uniquely apply it to your life. Challenge yourself to take action. Knowledge applied is wisdom earned. Determine what is important to you and get after it with intention, effort, and consistency. Until next time, stay resilient, my friends.